She was just another passenger, until she wasn't. From the moment she stepped into first class, polished, poised, and unmistakably black, eyes followed, not with admiration, but with judgment sharpened by years of unchecked bias. A simple ask for help with overhead luggage spiraled into something uglier, louder, filmed by strangers too stunned to move. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't plead. She absorbed every insult, every shove masked as procedure, every glance that said she didn't belong. Because she was waiting, not to react, but to reveal. And when the truth came out, it shook the walls of the very company that tried to bury her. If you think you know where this story is going, you don't. Like, subscribe, drop a comment. Where are you watching from? And how far did you get before your jaw dropped? This isn't just about revenge. It's about power cloaked in silence, and the moment silence chooses to speak. The air inside Denver International's premium boarding gate was clinical and cold, buzzing with quiet conversations and the polite friction of polished shoes against tile. Callista Ray stood alone, her posture elegant, confident but unassuming, her muted ivory suit carefully tailored, and her small black carry-on resting at her side. She had flown hundreds of times, executive class, chartered, even international business elite, but today's flight to Seattle felt especially important. It marked the beginning of what was supposed to be a quiet, restorative weekend after months of grinding negotiations and boardroom battles. She wasn't a woman who craved applause or recognition. She just wanted what she had earned: respect, rest, and a moment of peace. When boarding was announced for Flight A827, Callista approached the gate, scanning her phone's digital pass before moving onto the jet bridge. The flight attendant posted at the cabin entrance gave her a glance that lingered. Britta Voss had worked in the airline industry for 16 years. Her face was taut with years of practice miles, but her eyes didn't lie. They narrowed the second Callista crossed the threshold. "Good afternoon," Britta said flatly, her voice empty of warmth. Callista nodded politely. "Good afternoon." She didn't expect friendliness, but she did expect professionalism. As she entered the first-class cabin, she located C2A, window side, front row, as quiet as possible. She lifted her carry-on carefully with her left hand, trying not to aggravate her right shoulder. The pain had been increasing over the past few weeks, something she hadn't addressed due to a packed schedule. As she angled the bag upward, her shoulder spasmed with sharp resistance. She paused, her expression tightening slightly. "Excuse me," she said evenly, turning to Britta, who was now greeting passengers behind her. "Would you mind giving me a hand with this? I've got a shoulder injury." Britta didn't even pretend to consider the request. She stopped, tilted her head, and frowned as if she had just been asked to do something outrageous. "We generally expect our passengers to handle their own luggage," she said, projecting her voice enough for nearby passengers to hear. Callista kept her composure. "It's a minor medical issue. I just need a quick assist." "Do you have documentation for that?" Britta's voice was now louder, more confrontational. "Medical requests need to be submitted in advance." Callista blinked. "I'm not asking for assistance for the entire flight. Just a lift." "Ma'am," Britta interrupted, stepping closer. "This isn't a bus stop. Handle your own." A quiet ripple moved through the cabin. The two businessmen across the aisle exchanged glances. A young couple in row 3 paused their conversation. Callista felt the weight of every glance land on her like a slap. Her dignity fought with her pain as she turned back to the bag and forced it into the bin, ignoring the spike in her shoulder. It caught halfway, twisted, and finally settled with a shove. She closed the bin herself, resisting the urge to grimace. As she sat, Britta leaned slightly toward her with a too-sweet smile. "If you're unable to safely travel unassisted, you may want to reconsider flying next time." Callista didn't respond. She didn't trust her voice. She lowered herself into the seat, fastened her belt, and stared forward. Less than 2 minutes later, Britta returned, flanked by another flight attendant and an airport employee wearing a security badge. "Ma'am," Britta announced, drawing the attention of several nearby passengers, "I've requested assistance for a non-compliant situation." Callista looked up. "Non-compliant." Britta folded her arms. I asked you to place your bag yourself. You didn't. Then you asked me to violate safety protocol by assisting you without proper clearance. That creates a liability issue." The lie burned. Callista glanced at the others. Some were watching openly, others hiding behind phones or tablets. "I never refused," Callista said quietly. "I asked for help. Politely." "That's not how I remember it," Britta snapped. The security employee shifted uncomfortably. "Is there a problem with her seat?" he asked. "No," Britta said. "Just a behavioral red flag I wanted noted before departure." "I'm not causing a disturbance," Callista said, her voice low but firm. "I simply requested help for a physical limitation. I wasn't rude. I wasn't disruptive." "This is your final warning, ma'am," Britta said, raising her voice again. "If you can't follow crew instructions, we will have to remove you from the aircraft." "She hasn't done anything wrong," a voice said softly from behind. A junior flight attendant, early 20s, Latina, clearly nervous, had been listening. Britta turned on her like a snapping wire. "Stay out of this, Grace." The girl looked down and disappeared toward the back. Callista sat frozen, every muscle tense, her breath tight. Not one person had offered her a word of support, not even a look of solidarity. It was as if her very presence had been scrubbed clean, like she'd been folded into the leather seat and erased. Britta reappeared suddenly, her steps deliberate and eyes locked on Callista with renewed purpose. She was holding a small electronic tablet in one hand, the glow from the screen reflecting off her neatly pressed uniform badge. Her lips were set in a tight, professional smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Excuse me, ma'am," she said, her tone dripping with civility as she addressed Callista once more. "I need to verify something with you. May I see your boarding pass again?" Callista, still gripping the armrest tightly, turned and responded with a steady voice. "You already saw it. I showed it to you before I sat down." Britta's expression hardened. "Yes, and I need to see it again. Please." Callista didn't move. Her heart thudded in her chest, but she wasn't sure if it was from fear, anger, or disbelief. She retrieved her phone and reopened her digital boarding pass, holding it out for Britta to view. Britta didn't even glance at it. Instead, she reached forward without warning and snatched the phone from Callista's hand. "Actually," Britta said, raising her voice loud enough for others in the cabin to hear, "we've had issues with falsified passes recently. I'll need to verify this with the gate." A few heads turned. A man in the next row lifted his headphones, and a woman behind them lowered her magazine to watch. Callista stood quickly, stunned and breathless. "That's my phone. You can't just take that." Britta ignored her, tapping rapidly on the screen with exaggerated purpose. She said, scanning the display as if she were reviewing a forged document. "This says 2A, but I'll have to confirm with the desk." "It's valid," Callista replied, her voice still calm but growing sharper. "It was issued by the airline. I have the email confirmation as well. I can show you." Britta cut her off. "There's no need. If it's real, it will show up in our system. If not, then we'll get you to your proper place." Her voice carried easily through the cabin now. Several passengers had stopped pretending to mind their business. Some were watching openly, eyes filled with intrigue, others with quiet amusement. Callista's throat tightened. She wanted to shout, to push back, to demand decency, but the heavy silence that had followed her since boarding had taught her exactly what kind of support she could expect. None. Britta turned toward the rear of the cabin, calling over her shoulder to another attendant. "Marla, can you call the gate and check C2A? We may have an unauthorized boarding." "I'm not unauthorized," Callista said, louder this time. "I'm a paid first-class passenger. You've got my name, my confirmation, check your system. This isn't a mistake." But Britta didn't respond. Instead, she raised the phone, now holding it like evidence. "Passengers," she announced, "we're just sorting out a seating issue. Please remain seated while we verify some information." Callista could feel eyes crawling over her like ants. She looked down the aisle, then around the cabin. No one said anything. No one offered support. The suited man beside her now looked embarrassed for her, but still offered nothing. not even a glance that said, "This is wrong." Callista extended her hand. "Give me back my phone." "In a moment," Britta said, backing toward the galley. "You'll be moved once we confirm where you should be." "I know where I should be," Callista said, her voice cracking under the pressure, a flicker of desperation sliding into her words. "Right here. I bought this seat. I belong here." Britta gave her a look of forced pity. "Sure, we'll get it figured out." She turned and disappeared behind the curtain. Callista stood there, rooted in place, arms stiff at her sides. She could feel it happening again, the way spaces would suddenly shift to swallow her, the way people would choose silence over justice. She had seen it before in boardrooms when her ideas were taken and repackaged under someone else's name, in hotels where she was asked if she was in the right place, in stores where she was followed but never greeted. She had fought through it all, but something about this moment, in this narrow, leather-wrapped space, felt more suffocating than usual. The curtain rustled. Britta emerged, holding the phone loosely, her face carefully composed. "We've confirmed your name is on the manifest," she said, then added quickly, "but it appears there was a technical issue with your class of service." Callista narrowed her eyes. "What kind of issue?" "The system downgraded your seat," Britta said smoothly. "It sometimes happens during rebooking. You've been reassigned to 23B, economy aisle." Laughter. Somewhere behind her, someone actually laughed. A quick, stifled chuckle that triggered another one, and then silence again. Callista's chest hollowed out. "That's a lie," she said, quieter than before. "I have the receipt. I have the booking confirmation. This is not a downgrade. You're moving me because you think I don't belong here." Britta smiled wider, the kind of smile meant to end a conversation. "You'll need to take your new seat. We're about to taxi." She extended Callista's phone, now smudged with fingerprints. Callista took it with shaking fingers. She looked at it, then looked around the cabin. No one moved. No one said a word. Her lips parted, but there were no more words that would help her. She grabbed her bag from the bin and stepped into the aisle. As she walked past Britta, the flight attendant leaned in and whispered, "It's not personal." She kept her eyes fixed on the seat back in front of her, refusing to look at the strangers beside her or the curious eyes that occasionally glanced her way, pretending to be curious about the commotion, but not concerned enough to say anything. Her first-class seat, the one she had paid for with her own money, the one she had selected weeks in advance, the one she had every right to occupy, now belonged to someone else. And worse, she had been made to feel as though she had attempted theft, as though she had dared to invade a space not meant for her. She tried to steady her thoughts, to refocus on the weekend ahead, but the humiliation clung to her skin like a film she couldn't peel off. Then came the footsteps. Slow, deliberate, unmistakably purposeful. Callista looked up, instinct tightening her stomach. Britta Voss was approaching again, her heels clicking against the floor with a sharpness that demanded attention. She was flanked this time by a uniformed man, tall, square-shouldered, with a security badge glinting on his chest. Behind him trailed the junior flight attendant from earlier, Grace, her eyes downcast, her steps hesitant. Britta wore a grin that didn't reach her eyes, her expression a polished weapon. She stopped directly beside Callista's seat and placed one hand on the headrest in front of her, leaning slightly forward like a teacher addressing a disobedient student. "Miss Ray," she began, her tone louder than necessary, making sure the surrounding rows could hear, "we've received a report of disruptive behavior." Callista turned her face toward her, carefully neutral. "A report from who?" "From myself, actually," Britta said smoothly, gesturing to the security guard. "This is Officer Malik. He's here to assess the situation. Several passengers were disturbed by your reaction earlier." "My reaction?" Callista asked, keeping her voice low. "You dragged me out of my seat without cause and lied about a downgrade." Britta ignored her. "And now," she continued, turning toward the security guard, "we have concerns that she may be in an unstable emotional state, possibly a danger to other passengers." Callista's mouth opened slightly, stunned. "You're saying I'm mentally unstable?" Britta nodded solemnly, her face painted with exaggerated concern. "You've been confrontational with the crew, refused to comply with standard procedures, and made aggressive accusations. We take mental health crises seriously here. A murmur of voices spread across the nearby rows. Hushed words exchanged over tray tables and between seatbacks. Callista looked to Officer Malik, who seemed uneasy now, shifting his weight from foot to foot. She turned back to Britta. "This is defamation," she said. "I haven't raised my voice. I haven't touched anyone. I haven't threatened anyone. You're inventing this to justify what you've already done." "Ma'am," the officer interjected, "I just need to ask a few questions. I'm not answering anything without knowing what exactly I've been accused of," Callista said, her tone calm but firm. "You're harassing me, and you know it." Britta's expression snapped. The mask of professionalism cracked. "You're refusing to cooperate again," she said, loud enough for half the cabin to hear. "And if you don't move to the gate with Officer Malik, I'll have no choice but to remove you by force." Callista didn't move. She sat motionless, refusing to be dragged any further. The eyes on her multiplied. Dozens of them now, watching, whispering, judging. She could see the judgments forming behind polite expressions. Britta's smile returned, but now it was razor-sharp. "Ma'am, please step out of your seat." Callista said nothing. Her silence, her refusal to play along, pushed Britta over the edge. In one sudden, unprovoked motion, Britta leaned forward, gripped Callista's upper arm, and yanked her upright. "I said move," she screamed, and with her other hand, she slapped Callista across the face. The sound cracked through the cabin. Gasps echoed like gunshots. A woman screamed. A child started crying 2 rows back. Callista stumbled backward, stunned, one hand to her cheek, her face flushed with heat and disbelief. "You people never follow rules," Britta hissed through clenched teeth, her face inches from Callista's. "You think the world owes you space. It doesn't." A silence fell over the cabin, vast and suffocating. Callista stood frozen, her jaw clenched, tears welling unbidden in the corners of her eyes, not from pain, but from the explosion of indignity, of public degradation, of being stripped of every ounce of dignity before a plane full of strangers. The officer stepped between them now, his face horrified, his hands raised. "That's enough," he barked, turning to Britta. "You just assaulted a passenger." Britta froze, her eyes darting toward the front of the cabin. She refused to comply, she said defensively, her voice shaking now. "I was protecting the cabin." "Stand down," Officer Malik ordered. "You're done here." Behind him, the junior attendant Grace had pressed herself against the bulkhead wall, her hands trembling, eyes wide with shock. I saw the whole thing," she said quietly. "Miss Ray didn't do anything." Despite the horrifying blow and the verbal assault that followed, no one else had risen to Callista's defense. No one had shouted. No one had stood. Most had simply turned their heads or buried their faces in their phones, some likely recording, but none intervening. A moment later, the cockpit door opened with a hiss, and out stepped the captain, a middle-aged man with salt and pepper hair and the kind of confidence that came from decades of seniority. His name tag read Captain Jarrett Steele. Beside him was the head purser, Miriam Lockhart, a woman with a clip bun and a clipboard tucked under one arm. They approached the scene slowly, eyes sweeping over Callista, Britta, the officer, and the stunned faces of the passengers. "What's going on here?" Captain Steele asked, his voice calm but firm. Britta was quick to answer, pointing toward Callista with a breathless edge. "Captain, this passenger became combative after being asked to move seats due to a manifest error. She began shouting, accused staff of discrimination, and refused to comply with seating instructions. When I tried to de-escalate, she pushed me." Callista's mouth dropped open in disbelief. "I never pushed anyone. She struck me, slapped me across the face in front of everyone." Officer Malik nodded quickly. "That's true. I witnessed it myself. The slap happened right here." Captain Steele raised an eyebrow, his expression unreadable, but instead of turning to Britta for an explanation, he looked at the head purser. Miriam glanced down at her clipboard. "I have an incident report filed 15 minutes ago by Lead Attendant Voss regarding a difficult passenger." Notes indicate that the passenger attempted to bypass seating class restrictions and became verbally aggressive. "Are you serious?" Callista's voice cracked. "You're believing paperwork over your own officer's statement?" She fabricated the entire thing. She said I didn't belong in first class, lied about a downgrade, and now this. Grace stepped forward again, voice firmer now. "She's telling the truth. I saw the whole thing." Britta raised her hand. Miss Ray was seated, quiet, respectful. She didn't shout, she didn't move aggressively. She just asked questions calmly. I didn't speak up earlier. I am sorry." But her words, though honest and trembling with sincerity, did little to sway the power standing before her. Captain Steele turned back to Britta and Miriam, who both stood rigid and composed. Then he looked at Callista, his gaze calculating. "Given the information I have, and to ensure the safety and comfort of our passengers, I believe it's best if we have you removed from this flight, Miss Ray." The decision landed like a punch to the gut. Callista took a small step back. "You can't be serious. I was the one assaulted. How can you justify removing me?" Miriam stepped in with a rehearsed corporate tone. "It's about maintaining order, Miss Ray. Your continued presence could incite further tension, and that's not a risk we're willing to take at 35,000 feet. This is retaliation," Officer Malik said, stepping between them. "You can't just ignore what happened here." "Sir," the captain said coolly, "I appreciate your input, but this is an airline matter now. We will file a report and our legal team will handle it. In the meantime, we must clear the situation before we're further delayed." Callista stared at him, her voice stripped of strength now, her shoulders slumped slightly under the weight of injustice. "You're all protecting her. Because you can. Because you always do." The captain didn't flinch. "Miss Ray, please cooperate." Officer Malik turned to her and softened his tone. "Mom, I'm sorry. I have to escort you off the plane now. I'll file a report on what I saw. I promise you that. But right now, I don't have the authority to overrule the captain." Callista's breath shook as she bent to grab her bag, hands trembling. She didn't cry. She wouldn't cry here. Not again. As she turned to walk up the aisle, the whispers began. Quiet comments, half swallowed by overhead noise. She probably had it coming. "Some people just look for trouble." I heard she was yelling at the crew. The words pricked at her skin like thorns. She didn't look at anyone as she passed. She didn't try to defend herself. There was nothing left to say that would be believed. A few passengers held up their phones, filming her as she moved toward the front, hoping to catch something scandalous, something worth sharing. The sting on her cheek had dulled to a throb, but the burn of what had happened, of being slapped, degraded, lied about, and thrown off a flight, remained sharp and unrelenting. Her suitcase sat beside her untouched, the wheels still scuffed from the hurried exit off the plane. She stared straight ahead at a laminated poster on the wall that boasted about the airline's commitment to excellence, and she wondered how many others had sat in this same chair, facing the same insult wrapped in corporate language. The door opened, and in walked a woman in her early 50s wearing a tailored black blazer and sensible heels. Her ID badge identified her as Rhonda Shields, Director of Customer Relations. Her expression was practiced sympathy, her hands holding a slim leather folder that she laid neatly on the table between them. She extended her hand. "Miss Ray, thank you for waiting. I'm very sorry for the inconvenience you experienced today." Callista didn't shake her hand. She didn't look away from the poster. "It wasn't an inconvenience. It was an assault," she said. Rhonda cleared her throat, withdrawing her hand and folding it over the folder. "Of course. And we take all such claims seriously. I want to assure you we're conducting an internal review. In the meantime, we want to do what we can to make things right." Callista finally turned to face her, her eyes steady, cold. "Make it right." "Yes," Rhonda said, with a tight smile. "We're prepared to offer you a goodwill package as a gesture of apology for today's experience. 2 complimentary round-trip tickets to any domestic destination of your choice, and a travel credit voucher in the amount of $1,000. Callista blinked once. "You're offering me tickets and cash to forget that one of your employees physically assaulted me, then falsely accused me of being unstable?" Rhonda maintained her smile, but her voice dropped into a more cautious tone. Miss Ray, we're not asking you to forget. We're acknowledging that an unfortunate situation occurred and hoping to resolve it respectfully. Resolve it respectfully, Callista echoed, as if testing the words. You mean quietly. We'd like to avoid unnecessary legal escalation, Rhonda said. For everyone's sake, these matters are always better handled internally, without negative press or prolonged conflict. For everyone's sake, Callista repeated, her voice now low and measured. Or for the sake of your airline's image? Rhonda gave a small, contained nod. Reputation matters to us, of course. But we also care about our passengers. Our goal is to ensure you feel heard and respected. Callista leaned forward slightly. Then, why did your crew treat me like a criminal? Why did your captain back an obvious lie? Why was I the one removed from the plane after being hit in front of dozens of witnesses? Rhonda's smile faltered for the briefest second. There was confusion. Emotions ran high. These things can be misinterpreted in the moment. But not misrecorded, Callista replied sharply. There were phones, videos, witnesses, a security officer, a junior attendant who confirmed what happened. Rhonda opened the folder and slid a sheet of paper across the table. This is a non-disclosure agreement, she said softly. Standard procedure. If you accept the package, we'd ask you to sign this in good faith. Callista didn't touch it. And if I don't, we'd still conduct our internal review, Rhonda said. But we can't guarantee the outcome. These things tend to become more complex once attorneys are involved. Callista smiled, and it wasn't warm. It was the smile of a chess player seeing a checkmate 3 moves ahead. Good, because I like complex. Rhonda's fingers twitched atop the folder. Miss Ray, may I speak candidly? Please do. You're clearly intelligent, composed, successful, and I understand how this may have felt personal. But the public moves on quickly. These stories rise and fall within news cycles. You could fight this and gain nothing, or you could accept this offer, travel on us again, and move forward. Callista stood slowly, picked up the unsigned NDA, folded it carefully, and placed it in her purse. She reached for her phone. You're right, she said, about one thing. Rhonda tilted her head, which is, I am successful. Callista scrolled through her phone, found the contact she needed, and tapped the call button. She turned her back to Rhonda as the line rang. 1, 2. On the third ring, a male voice answered. She spoke just 4 words. She made her way toward the exit of the terminal, but before reaching the rideshare zone, she paused near a row of windows and checked her phone. Notifications were already appearing on her lock screen like an endless rainfall, emails, missed calls, texts, and social media alerts that were multiplying by the second. She unlocked her screen and opened her messaging app, seeing a single message from a number marked only as CJ1. It read, Uploading now. 5 camera angles confirmed. Legal review done. Phase 2 underway. Callista closed her eyes for just a second and inhaled deeply. She could already feel the shift happening, like the atmosphere before a storm, when the clouds pull tight and the world goes unnaturally quiet before thunder splits the sky. She boarded her car and left the airport without another word, knowing the next move wasn't hers to make. It was the public's. By the time she arrived at her downtown hotel, the video of Britta Voss slapping her had already hit its first million views. It had been uploaded across multiple platforms: Twitter, TikTok, YouTube, Instagram. And each clip showed the same unmistakable sequence. Britta towering over a seated Callista, her voice raised, her posture aggressive, and then that single unmistakable slap, captured clearly from 3 angles. The sound was crisp, the shock in the cabin immediate. The expressions on the passengers' faces, once passive and detached, became key elements in the viewer's understanding of the scene. There was no ambiguity, no confusión, just raw, documented truth. Hashtag surged through trending lists. Hashtag justice for Callista. Hashtag Meridian airline abuse. Hashtag flying while black. Thousands of users shared the videos with captions of disbelief, outrage, and grief. Celebrities started reposting. Influencers reacted in real time with commentary, some crying on camera, others shaking with fury. Civil rights activists began tagging the Department of Transportation and demanding accountability. The airline, clearly caught off guard, responded 2 hours later with a generic corporate statement posted to all their social channels. We are aware of a regrettable customer confusion incident on Flight A827. We take such matters seriously and are conducting an internal review to ensure the safety and comfort of all our passengers. The backlash was instant. Comments poured in calling the statement insulting, vague, and cowardly. A woman gets assaulted by your staff on camera and you call it regrettable confusion. One user replied. Own your racism, said another. You take nothing seriously but your stock price. The airline's social media teams went silent after that. No further responses, no follow-ups, no apologies. But silence in this era wasn't protection. It was provocation. News outlets picked up the story by evening. CNN, NBC, The Guardian, BuzzFeed, The Root, and others all ran the headline. Flight attendant assaults black passenger in first-class dispute. Anchor panels debated the footage. Legal experts weighed in, and clips of the incident ran back-to-back with commentary about race, class, and accountability. It didn't take long before former employees began to speak out. An ex-flight attendant named Sherry Slam, who had worked for the airline 5 years earlier, posted a now-viral thread on Twitter detailing her experiences with Britta Voss. I worked 3 flights with her, she wrote. Each time, she targeted passengers of color, subtle at first, then increasingly hostile. Management always backed her up. Complaints were ignored. I finally left because of the trauma. Another employee, a former gate agent named Trevor Morris, uploaded a TikTok video sharing a similar story. Britta Voss wasn't just a bad day employee. She had a pattern. Management knew. They protected her. I was told not to escalate things when she made passengers uncomfortable. In just 12 hours, the conversation around the airline transformed from outrage over one incident to an indictment of an entire system. People shared their own stories of being mistreated while flying, especially those who were black, brown, disabled, or appeared out of place in premium cabins. A mosaic of discrimination began to form, one post at a time. A petition demanding Britta's termination and a formal apology to Callista reached 100,000 signatures in under 12 hours. It passed 250,000 by morning. Calls flooded the airline's customer service line. Shareholders began asking questions. Reporters staked out the corporate headquarters in Dallas. Despite the rising storm, Callista said nothing. She didn't tweet. She didn't post. She didn't give a statement. She watched the world do what it rarely had the courage to do. See and believe a black woman's truth without her needing to bleed out to prove it. Her hair was wrapped in a smooth low bun, her face free of makeup except for a soft foundation that muted the purple shadow blooming on her cheek. She wasn't here to look good. She was here to end a performance that had gone on for far too long. The chaos of the night before hadn't slowed. It had intensified. Overnight, the videos had surpassed 15 million views collectively. Influencers and public figures had posted calls for boycotts. Legal analysts were breaking down the case. Editorials were appearing in major newspapers. Every outlet had Callista Ray's name on their front page, but what none of them knew, yet, was the full extent of who she really was. Not the woman in seat 23B. Not the confused passenger from a regrettable incident. She was something else entirely. She looked across the room at her team, her legal counsel, her PR strategist, and her executive assistant, all of whom had worked with her for years. They had seen this plan built piece by piece, but only now were they watching it ignite. "Are they ready downstairs?" Callista asked, her voice low but firm. Her assistant, Breck, nodded. "The press is in place. Live stream is tested. And I just got confirmation that the board is watching from New York." Callista stood. "Then let's begin." The elevator ride down to the press suite was silent. No one needed a pep talk. No one needed direction. This wasn't about vengeance. It was about exposure, transformation, and control. When the doors opened, cameras turned. Dozens of reporters packed the room. their eyes locking on her the second she entered. Flashbulbs flickered like lightning. At the front stood a podium with the Meridian Sky Group emblem engraved into its base, a stylized wing wrapped in a globe, symbolizing the reach of one of the most powerful transportation conglomerates in the world. Callista approached it with unflinching calm. She didn't check her notes. She didn't need them. The room fell to silence as she began to speak. "Good morning," she said, her voice even, her cadence deliberate. "As many of you are aware, an incident occurred yesterday aboard Meridian Airlines Flight A827, resulting in the assault and removal of a passenger, me. I was slapped, degraded, and publicly shamed by a lead flight attendant. I was further silenced by the flight's captain and the company's own customer relations team, who attempted to cover up the event rather than address it. What was portrayed to the public as a regrettable customer confusion was, in fact, a display of institutional discrimination and abuse of authority." She paused, letting that statement hang for a beat. "Today, I am not here to ask for justice. I'm here to enact it. Effective immediately, I am exercising my rights and responsibilities as the majority shareholder of Meridian Sky Group, the parent company of Meridian Airlines. I acquired this position quietly 6 months ago as part of a strategic shift in corporate governance. I had hoped to observe operations from a distance before stepping in. That distance as of today is over." The room erupted. Reporters gasped, others scrambled to tweet, type, or transmit. One cameraman whispered, "No way," under his breath. But Callista continued, undeterred. "As of now, I am ordering a comprehensive internal investigation into the culture, hiring practices, and customer service procedures across all divisions of Meridian Airlines. All staff involved in yesterday's incident, including lead attendant Britta Voss, Captain Jared Steele, and Customer Relations Director Rhonda Shields, are hereby suspended pending review." A second wave of reaction surged across the room. Additionally, she added, the airline's public relations department will be reorganized, and a task force led by external civil rights experts will oversee the retraining of flight and ground staff. This is not about damage control. This is about culture repair. Reporters' hands shot into the air. Callista nodded toward one. "Is it true you flew under your real name?" a woman asked. "Why not make your identity known before the flight?" Callista met her gaze. "Because I needed to see the system at work unfiltered. Power changes how people behave. Titles create deference. I wanted to experience this company the way a regular customer would. What I found was deeply troubling, and not just in my own experience. I've since read over 200 employee complaints that mirror the same pattern. This isn't a fluke. It's a culture." "What about Britta Voss?" another reporter asked. "Is she being terminated?" "She's being investigated," Callista answered. "But this isn't just about one person. It's about the leaders who protected her, the system that normalized her behavior, and the silence that allowed it." The press conference continued for 20 more minutes, but the message had already landed. The internet exploded again, this time not just with outrage, but astonishment. Articles with headlines like "She owns the airline" and "Passenger victim turns corporate titan" spread like wildfire. The revelation changed everything. The hours following Callista's seismic press conference had reshaped the national conversation. News tickers ran her name every 5 minutes, while primetime programs booked panels to dissect her strategy, ethics, and intent. Was it a corporate trap? A brilliant social justice sting? Or a betrayal of trust? No matter the perspective, one truth was undeniable. Callista Ray had rewritten the rules of exposure. She had taken what was meant to be a moment of private humiliation and detonated it into a movement that could no longer be contained within the PR playbook of Meridian Airlines. But she wasn't finished. The next morning, inside a grand conference ballroom transformed into a media staging area, journalists, attorneys, civil rights leaders, and airline staff packed the room, buzzing with expectation. At the front was a new podium, flanked by 2 massive projection screens and a long table draped in navy cloth where Callista's team sat, flanked by legal and ethics advisors. Callista entered in silence, dressed in a deep emerald suit that glowed under the lights, her expression serene, her poise undeniable. There were no teleprompters, no scripts, just the quiet strength of a woman who knew her truth and was ready to place it on full display. "Good morning," she began, her voice soft but commanding. "Thank you for returning. Yesterday, I shared my position. Today, I share the pattern." With a subtle nod, one of her aides tapped the tablet, and the first slide appeared on the screens behind her. It was a document header, Internal Complaint Log Britta Voss, 2014-2023. A wave of gasps rippled through the audience. The next slide revealed a redacted complaint from 2017, submitted by a black businessman who was accused by Britta of seat fraud while sitting in first class, despite having a fully valid ticket. The language was eerily similar to Callista's own encounter. "He was moved to economy," Callista explained, "without apology, without refund, without consequence to the staff who targeted him." Slide after slide followed, each one showing patterns of racially biased incidents logged internally but ignored by management. Hispanic passengers labeled disruptive. Muslim passengers delayed under security protocol. A Native American woman forced to discard ceremonial attire because it made Britta uncomfortable. The audience sat in stunned silence as Callista narrated each account with controlled precision, her voice never rising, never falling into rage, just unwavering in its truth. Then came a transcript dated just 3 months ago. It was a formal complaint filed by a junior flight attendant, Grace. In the report, she detailed witnessing Britta single out black passengers for extra screening and delay, all of which were either dismissed as exaggeration or written off as standard procedure. "This transcript," Callista said, pointing to the screen, "was filed, read, and dismissed with a single sentence. No actionable pattern observed." She let that sentence linger before advancing the screen to show an internal email exchange between senior flight crew discussing how to handle the optics of racially profiled passengers by spacing out interventions. The crowd erupted. Even the reporters, typically stoic, gasped aloud, and camera flashes flickered like wildfire. "There was a pattern," Callista continued. "There was a culture, and there was silence at every level of leadership." A reporter called out from the crowd, "Why didn't you reveal your identity before you flew? Why not give them the chance to treat you differently?" Callista met the question head-on. "Because that's the point. They shouldn't have to know who I am to treat me with dignity. They shouldn't need my credentials to offer me respect. I wanted the unfiltered truth, and I got it." She tapped again, and a final screen appeared. It showed her original travel documents. "You'll notice the name isn't mine," she said. "I flew under a pseudonym because I wanted to conduct an unbiased audit. I've done this before, quiet evaluations of client-facing roles in industries we're restructuring. But never have I encountered what I did on Flight A827. The room shifted. No longer just a press conference, it became a courtroom of public reckoning. She continued, "This is not about one employee. It's about an ecosystem of permission, a system that rewards silence and punishes integrity. This is why we're launching a sweeping anti-discrimination initiative within Meridian Sky Group. Every level of employee, from tarmac crew to executive board, will undergo mandatory training, bias screenings, and performance reevaluation." She paused for breath, then added, "And we will report every step publicly. No hidden reforms, no closed-door corrections. If we say we're better, we're going to prove it." Applause broke the room open, not polite clapping, but a deep, standing ovation that rippled through the crowd. Even some of the airline staff, off-duty and dressed in civilian clothes, rose from their chairs. The cameras zoomed in on her face as she stepped back from the podium, giving room to her legal team to field technical questions. Callista didn't linger to gloat. She returned to her suite where her assistant waited with a tablet showing live broadcast stats. 30 million views and climbing. That night, as the footage ran on every news channel, a previously recorded interview aired on 60 Minutes, in which Callista discussed her motivations for the audit, the company's failures, and her unshakable belief that justice is built, not just demanded. The interviewer asked her, "What was the most painful part of what happened to you?" Callista had answered without pause, "That I wasn't surprised. That I've seen it before. That millions of people saw that video and said, that could have been me. That's the pain, but also the power. The aftermath of Callista Ray's full exposure was not merely swift, it was seismic. In the corporate corridors of Meridian Sky Group, once held together by decades of traditional power structures and unshakable boardroom alliances, tremors of accountability began to crack every wall that once sheltered misconduct. In the 48 hours following her press conference, 3 things happened in rapid succession that cemented the movement from moral outrage to operational consequence. First, Britta Voss was formally terminated. The news came in the form of a terse press release issued by Meridian Airlines legal department, stating that after a full review of the incident aboard flight AA-27, lead attendant Voss had been found to have violated the company's core conduct policy and was no longer employed with the airline. There was no ceremony, no farewell, no corporate fluff. The release simply ended with the line, "We do not condone behavior that undermines the safety and dignity of our passengers." Within hours, Britta's personal social media accounts vanished. But it was too late. Online sleuths had already archived her posts, some of which included thinly veiled racist commentary, insider jokes about passengers, and photos that painted a consistent picture of entitlement and disdain for those she considered beneath her. Her friends who once commented with laughing emojis were now untagging themselves, and former colleagues who once tolerated her silence came forward with fresh testimonies. One anonymous submission, verified by HR records, revealed that Britta had been reprimanded internally 3 years earlier for referring to a Nigerian passenger as probably a scammer during a boarding delay. The captain, Jared Steele, faced his own consequences. The Federal Aviation Administration, under intense public pressure, launched a formal investigation into his inaction during the incident. Within a week, the FAA revoked his license, citing gross negligence and failure to protect passenger safety in an active escalation scenario. An internal audit revealed that Steele had a history of looking the other way during previous crew complaints, earning him a reputation as hands-off, which an airline culture had translated to complicit. He made no public statement. Instead, a photo surfaced online showing him loading a moving van outside his suburban home, his face partially covered by a baseball cap, flanked by 2 friends who looked uncomfortable under the lenses of the paparazzi. But it wasn't just individuals who paid the price. Meridian Sky Group itself took a historic hit. After weeks of mounting pressure, a coalition of civil rights attorneys filed a class action lawsuit on behalf of more than 80 past passengers who had experienced racial discrimination, unjustified seat reassignments, targeted screenings, or retaliatory downgrades on Meridian-operated flights. Videos, testimonials, and internal emails, some of which Callista had made available to the public, became the foundation of the case. Under threat of prolonged litigation and further brand erosion, the company agreed to settle. The payout was $40 million, the largest of its kind in U.S. aviation history related to discrimination. Callista's decision not to accept personal compensation was widely covered. She issued a single statement: "No amount of money can balance the scales. What I seek is not payment but change." The court-mandated settlement included structural reforms, monthly bias audits by third-party firms, a newly established diversity oversight council with independent authority, and a real-time passenger complaint dashboard that the public could view online. But the most transformative change came next. At an emergency shareholder meeting held 3 weeks after the initial incident, a vote was called. Confidence in the existing CEO had plummeted, especially after his vague apologies and absence from public engagement. Shareholders, eager to protect their investments and buoyed by rising public support for the company's reform direction, motioned to install interim leadership until a long-term executive search could be completed. The vote wasn't close. Callista Ray was named interim CEO of Meridian Sky Group with 79% shareholder approval. The announcement made national headlines within minutes. CNBC ran the story under the headline, "From Cabin to Boardroom. Callista Ray to lead airline she transformed." Stocks surged by 16% within the next trading session, fueled by confidence in new leadership and the potential for the airline to rebuild from its now exposed wreckage. Callista's first act as CEO was symbolic and powerful. She reinstated all previously dismissed discrimination complaints and created a task force to contact each complainant personally. The stories, once buried under layers of bureaucracy and neglect, were brought into the light, analyzed for patterns, and responded to with direct restitution when warranted. In a closed-door meeting with department heads, Callista laid out her expectations: radical transparency, zero tolerance for retaliation, and a shift from reactive crisis management to proactive cultural realignment. "We're not just going to fly," she told them. "We're going to elevate." Internally, the morale shift was palpable. Employees who had once walked the concourses with their heads down now greeted one another with cautious optimism. Staff members who had been silenced for years began submitting reports with confidence. At airports around the country, posters began appearing in Meridian terminals bearing the new slogan, "Every passenger matters. Every voice counts." Callista refused to pose for ad campaigns or engage in performative branding. "This isn't about me," she said in an internal memo. "It's about rebuilding trust, brick by brick." For Britta, the fallout was complete. Her attempt to paint herself as a misunderstood veteran of airline stress backfired. No network would touch her. No airline would hire her. Her name became a case study in HR seminars about unchecked privilege and the cost of unrepentant bias. For Captain Steele, a small niche blog published an anonymous essay, likely written by him, reflecting on his failure to act. It ended with the words, "I saw it happen, and I did nothing. That moment cost me more than my job. It cost me my sense of who I was." And for Callista, the reckoning wasn't a victory parade. It was a transition. From injured passenger to intentional leader. From target to architect. Her rise was not about revenge, but response. A demonstration of what happens when the wrong person is underestimated by the right system. The weeks that followed Callista Ray's rise to interim CEO of Meridian Sky Group were unlike anything the aviation industry had seen in modern memory. Where most corporate crises ended in sanitized press statements and hushed executive firings, hers evolved into something deeper, an examination of what accountability could become when justice was not simply retributive but restorative. The media, initially fixated on the drama of her exposure and her rapid assumption of power, began to shift their focus to the transformation taking place under her leadership. Terminals across the country rolled out cultural competency kiosks. Staff town halls turned into collaborative listening sessions. What had been a company defined by silence and performance was becoming one led by vulnerability and growth. But while the exterior world reshaped its narrative, the story still had one chapter unresolved. Britta Voss. The name still provoked emotional responses online. For some, she was the embodiment of unchecked privilege and the pain it inflicts. For others, she was a scapegoat, a product of a system that not only allowed but encouraged behavior like hers, so long as it stayed quiet. For Callista, Britta was something else entirely. A moment, a mirror, a choice. And then, unexpectedly, a letter arrived. It was delivered not through PR intermediaries or email, but in an envelope, handwritten, addressed directly to Callista in careful, slanted cursive. It began with 3 simple words, "I was wrong." Britta's letter, spanning 6 pages, was raw, unpolished, and riddled with confessions. She recounted not just the incident on flight A827, but moments that stretched back across her career. She admitted to making assumptions about passengers based on their appearance, tone, even the clothes they wore. She described how the culture around her rewarded compliance over courage, how she convinced herself that policy was protection, even when it became a weapon. She wrote of her own silence when she saw colleagues mistreat others, and how that silence became a kind of poison she carried into every cabin. "I didn't start this way," she wrote, "but I became someone I would have hated in my 20s. Entitled, suspicious, afraid of difference, and too arrogant to admit it." She wrote of the days after the video went viral, the isolation, the fury, the humiliation, and then the self-reflection. She wrote about reading every comment online, not to defend herself, but to understand. She wrote about sleepless nights, long walks without direction, and therapy sessions where she said, out loud for the first time, that what she did was racist. Not inadvertently, not subtly, but absolutely. Her final paragraph stunned Callista the most. I would like to ask, without expectation, without assumption, if I can participate in the anti-discrimination initiative. Not as a leader, not as a face, but as a student. Someone who wants to rebuild, brick by brick, the things I helped break. If redemption is a door, I understand it might be locked. But I'm knocking. Callista read the letter twice. Then she read it again. And for a long moment, she did nothing. Not because she didn't know how to respond, but because she knew exactly what kind of choice stood before her. The world wanted villains and heroes. It wanted simple morality tales where the bad were banished and the good triumphed. But Callista had never been interested in that kind of justice. Her fight had never been about punishment. It had been about clarity, structure, and transformation. 2 days later, she sent a response. In it, she outlined her terms. Britta would be allowed to join the initiative as a probationary volunteer, subject to regular evaluations, and without authority over any decisions. She would complete the full curriculum, sit in on passenger listening panels, and undergo bias training alongside entry-level employees. Her presence would not be as a symbol of forgiveness, but of accountability, and she would begin not in a boardroom, but at a gate, helping travelers navigate the busiest hours of travel under the supervision of a mentor. The announcement sparked fierce debate. Some hailed it as visionary leadership. Others condemned it as a betrayal. Why give her another chance? They asked. Why give her anything at all? Callista didn't defend her decision publicly. She didn't stage a press conference or pen an op-ed. She simply said, when asked by one persistent journalist, people are not fixed. Systems are not fixed. If we demand change, we must also build paths for it to happen. Grace without accountability is weakness. But accountability without grace is just another cage. Slowly, over months, the narrative began to change. Britta showed up. She worked. She listened. She apologized in real time. She never asked for the cameras, never asked for public acknowledgement. Instead, she stood in the background, absorbing what she once dismissed. There were moments where her discomfort was palpable, when passengers recognized her and walked away, when employees refused to shake her hand. But she stayed, and in staying, she began to shed the version of herself that had once ruled an aisle with impunity. And Callista? She continued to lead. But more than that, she mentored. She initiated a scholarship fund for aviation students from underrepresented communities. She launched an independent review board to evaluate airline conduct nationwide. She partnered with lawmakers to draft the Passenger Equity Bill, legislation aimed at codifying protection against discriminatory treatment in travel. And on the 1-year anniversary of the flight that changed everything, she returned to Denver International Airport, not to revisit the site of her humiliation, but to unveil a new terminal plaque. It read, "Let dignity be our altitude." The dedication ceremony was small, intimate, and off-camera. Among those present were Grace, the junior attendant who had found her voice that day, Malik, the security officer who had stepped in, and yes, Britta, standing silently in the back. She said nothing. She didn't need to. Her presence was not about redemption completed, but redemption attempted. A symbol not of perfection, but of process. As the plaque was revealed, Callista stepped back and addressed the small group. What happened that day was injustice. What followed was anger. What came next was truth. But truth without action is memory. And we are not here to remember. We are here to build. She paused, then added, "The most dangerous lie we tell ourselves is that the story is over. It isn't. It never is. It's being written by every choice we make after the apology, after the reckoning, after the light." The applause was quiet, respectful, and honest. Not a celebration, but a confirmation that healing had begun, that the system could evolve, that grace, when balanced with consequence, could truly change the world. The end. If you enjoyed this story and want to see more gripping, meaningful narratives like it, Be sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. I'd love to hear what you think about the plot. What moments stood out to you the most? What do you think about the choices the characters made, especially in the final stage? Let me know in the comments where you're watching from and how this story resonated with you. Your thoughts help shape the direction of future stories, so don't hold back. Let's talk about justice, change, and the power of storytelling to spark reflection.